Hey everybody, I'm here today to talk about the costs of gestational surrogacy, and I need to start right away by just saying a disclaimer that this is our specific situation in our specific agency and in our state. We live in Florida, and even in Florida, I don't know that every matching agency or situation is necessarily the same, but with our path, this is how much it's going to end up costing for us and how much it has cost for us. And let me just go ahead and be specific that we are going through a gestational carrier via a matching agency. So we reached out to a company who is kind of like a middleman for the surrogacy process. That's if you don't know somebody who is willing to carry it for you, carry your embryos for you. And so this is just kind of with the agency we chose and with our match that we were matched with, this is what our costs were. And I always feel so uncomfortable talking about money on these things. This is not in any way us bragging or whatever, like I'm not trying to make this anything but an informational video, and I just feel like I have to say that for some reason. Just let me briefly tell you that the way it worked was our fertility company, who we were storing our previously made embryos with, we had 2 left from an IVF cycle that I went through in 2016, the first of which resulted in a miscarriage, the second of which resulted in my son. Both times we did end up implanting 2 embryos each. So out of the 4 embryos we implanted, I only got pregnant with 1 successfully, which I'm not downplaying, that's wonderful, obviously, but I just need to say that. And with that, we ended up having 2 additional embryos that were the same grade, which is basically like the quality as my son, who was successfully carried. So those were still frozen and they had been. Let me go ahead and start by saying right away that the cost of freezing embryos per year is $360. So I am going to also include our costs of IVF as well, because it is part of this. I mean, if we hadn't had embryos made, we would have had to start from scratch then and make them, but I'll get to that at the end. So like I said, that's our path with this. And so basically how it worked was our fertility clinic gave us the name of our agency, an agency that they usually work with, and that was kind of in the same office complex as them and that they were comfortable with. And we contacted her. She came over to our house and told us kind of how it worked. And she gave us like a cost breakdown of what the agency costs were, as well as what the surrogacy costs were going to be. And they do kind of give you a broad overview of like chunks of cash that it would cost. I say cash, we didn't like have a big sack of money and we're like paying that way, but you know what I mean. Just so that we were fully aware of what we were getting into, because you really don't want any like surprises along the way, like, oh, I didn't know, whatever. So basically she presented us with the terms sheet, and that was that cost breakdown. So the way that worked was, upon signing a contract with the agency, as an agency specific contract, I say that because there's also a gestational surrogacy contract that we signed with her later. So upon that, we pay the agency $10,000, and that's called a matching fee or a finder's fee, where they go out and they search for a match for us. And that's before anything happens. So that's just their cost to go out and find somebody. And that process includes them sending us profiles of women who are willing to be surrogates. And that's kind of very like a dating site sort of. So we created a profile with like a blurb about us and photos of us and just why we want to do this, what our history is. And she did the same. And we were presented with each other. I think first she was presented with us and had to decide if she wanted to present herself to us, and of course she did. And when that happens, at the end of that profile is her terms sheet. So what she costs, or what what she wants to be paid, compensated, along with what she's okay, kind of like a rough idea of what she is and isn't okay with. For example, we were implanting 2 embryos. She had to be okay with that. And what her broad views of are on termination and selective reduction and that kind of thing. So like I said, that process cost $10,000 from the jump. Second from that is kind of the second half of the agency fee. And that is, we were to pay upon confirmation of a heartbeat, an additional $15,000. So we had to agree that that was, something that we were comfortable with as well. So basically the agency fee in total is $25,000. Okay, now I'm gonna get into what our specific surrogate requested to be compensated. And this is kind of, it's a lot of different numbers, so I'm gonna list them all, and at the end I've kind of estimated and added them up. Okay, so her base compensation. I should also say here in this, that in some states, a surrogate who carries insurance on herself gets paid more money because we wouldn't have to pay out of pocket for anything, and some of them, sometimes they don't. In this situation, she didn't. It wouldn't matter if she had or didn't have insurance, the base compensation was the same. And that was $25,000. So she will get $25,000, just that nothing else has to come out of that money. That is just her money for doing this. And the way that works is it's, I'm looking down at my list here, I'm sorry. So at the confirmation of a heartbeat, she would get $2,500. And then every anniversary month after that of the heartbeat, she will get an additional $2,500. And that will total up to $25,000. So, and then from there, the next category, I'm just gonna go down on the terms sheet the way it was presented to us, because that's how I wrote it down, would be, this is kind of like an if amount. There are some things on here that we wouldn't necessarily have to pay, only in the event that they came up. So this one would be for invasive procedures. For example, a CVS, like amniocentesis, a DNC if she ended up needing that, or if she ended up having an ectopic pregnancy, it would be $500 for any of those things that happen. So if she ended up having an ectopic pregnancy, it would be $500. If she then ended up needing a DNC, $500. And then $1,000 for selective reduction or termination. So if we ended up putting in our 2 embryos, they both split and we got 4 or something, and the doctor was like, this is so unsafe, you need to terminate one. I'm not saying that that's something we would do or are comfortable with either way, but that has to be included in there. So it was $1,000 for that. There's also something called a mock cycle in this process, where she starts on medication for a full month, and she's monitored just to kind of see what her levels are and whatever. So it's like a full month before, and that would be $500, about $250 at the beginning, $250 at the end. And then this section was particularly pertinent to us. It's in the case of multiples. So for each additional baby that's in there, it's $3,500. And that is starting at 20 weeks. It breaks down to $583.33. And that's at 20 weeks, 24 weeks, 28 weeks, 32 weeks, 36 weeks, and 40 weeks. And I say that part specifically because if you remember our video regarding like the, why am I drawing a blank here? Contract, there is a piece in there that says that if at a certain, we agreed on a certain gestation in the pregnancy, if the babies came early, it's just part of the contract that she would not get paid further than that. Even though, like say the babies come at 36 weeks, and that would be her last payment in general, the last $2,500 payment and the last multiple payment. That's just in the contract. And we still have the right to pay her the full amount if we want to, but we are not obligated to. I think I mentioned in that video, I was really uncomfortable not paying her the full amount agreed upon just because she came early, because obviously that is not her choice, but that's verbiage that's in there and I just need to say it. Okay, the next part that could or could not apply would be for a C-section. So if she were to have a C-section, that's an additional $3,500. And then these are just additional expenses that are not just kind of like extra expenses. So maternity clothing. If she were to be pregnant with a singleton, at 13 weeks, she would get $500. Because she is pregnant with multiples, it's $800. And that's just a one-time thing. So $800 at 13 weeks for her to buy some maternity clothes. Okay. Oh, and I should say that we don't get receipts for that or anything. It's if she already has clothes that fit her, if she chooses not to, that's just money for her. Life insurance, we do have to put life insurance on her, of course. And the way that works is it's a $250,000 policy that she can choose the beneficiary of. That's on her life. So I think in this case, she actually picked her mother. So we paid to put a $250,000 $1,000 policy on her, and that's mandatory. We have to have that much. And then an additional $50,000 policy that we choose the beneficiaries of. So it would be kind of, I mean, and for a loss of her life, but also our baby's lives as well. I hate talking about this part because this is just something I don't want to think about, but that only ended up being about $20 a month, which she is willing, she can totally carry that on afterwards and just have that policy. She would just pick up the payments on it. It's pretty cheap. So $20 a month, and that started before the pregnancy. So that would be for the whole time. Excuse me, my throat made a noise. Okay, this next one is travel. She lives where all of the doctor's appointments are. She's not having to travel really anywhere. So it's 57 cents a mile over 40 miles that she has to drive. So currently she hasn't had to drive more than 40 miles in like a day or in a trip or whatever, because all of the visits and stuff are right around her. I know in a couple other scenarios I've heard of, the surrogate, the intended parents, which would be me, has requested that the surrogate go to a hospital that's closer to them, which seems crazy only because, first of all, we're blessed that we're even in an area where we can drive to her appointments, because so many other gestational surrogates are out of the state. But I want her to be close to her doctors and close to the hospital, God forbid. Anyway, so 57 cents a mile over 40 miles. And that would also include any airfare, hotel, parking, anything like that, that she were to include. Say she had to go to a doctor that was far away or whatever, see a specialist or something like that. Loss of reproductive organs is another one. So if something happens where she ends up losing an ovary or her uterus, it's $2,500 for the uterus and $1,500 for each ovary. Child care and housekeeping is the next one. That's if she ends up on bed rest. Basically, that just can't exceed $150 a week. So that's something that, like I said, if she ends up getting put on bed rest, that's just for child care and housekeeping. We also would reimburse her wages. So for her, that's about $15 an hour, and that would be up to 40 hours a week. Of course, that's what she's used to working, and there is no cap on that. So we would just pay her. But here's the thing: we did put a short-term disability policy on her life insurance policy, and so we would end up just paying the $20 a month that's included in that policy. So that's if the doctor puts her on bed rest or says she has to not work or something. So basically they would reimburse her, but we're paying for the policy, whether she uses it or not. Okay, this next one is called a hospital income policy. So if something happens where she is put into the hospital on bed rest, not at home, into the hospital, we pay for a policy that costs $170 a year, and she would receive $250 per 24-hour period that she is in the hospital. And this is confusing because if she ends up activating that policy, we would no longer pay for childcare and housekeeping as a result of bed rest, because that is what's reimbursing her. That's if she's in the hospital, of course, because obviously that's a significant amount more money. Okay, the next thing would be lost wages after birth. So that the short-term disability policy doesn't cover that. That would only be activated if she has to go on short-term disability, like if she's on bed rest like 6 weeks before she gives birth or something. So it's 2 weeks reimbursement of wages for vaginal delivery, 4 weeks for C-section. Okay, and then these next things are, so $1,000 we pay for her legal fees. She had to, of course, have this contract drawn up and have the consult with a lawyer. So $1,000 for hers, $3,500 for ours. So there are 2 different times in the process where we need a lawyer. One was at the beginning, and then one is towards the end. And I think at 24 weeks, we actually will call the lawyer to get the rest of that going. And then there's the actual transfer itself, which was like a facility fee at the fertility clinic, and that was $9,000. And then her medication that she started at the beginning of the process for the IVF was $2,500. And then she's able to also submit receipts for anything else that comes up that we didn't include here. So if something, and I can't even like think of a good example of this, but if for some reason she had to produce some kind of money throughout the process that wasn't included in here, she could have a receipt, and that's included as well in the reimbursement. Okay, So that's all for surrogacy. And that ends up coming out to about, this is if none of those would be instances come up. Like I didn't include like a C-section or any of that stuff. This is just what we will definitely be paying, and that is about $75,000. And that's including like our policies that we have on her and that kind of stuff. The additional things that could come up that I listed there, if you add them all up at their maximum amount, is like another $20,000 to $25,000. So it could potentially be just the surrogacy process alone, not the embryo making, could be from $7,500 to about $100,000. And now we will talk about our IVF/embryo creation fees. And this is our specific clinic. This is what it costs for us. This is only going to be including making the embryos, not transferring them into me, because it doesn't matter in this process, because that was part of that $9,000. But that's just the transfer fee. So this is not including that. So the lab and physician fee is $6,500, which is basically once they remove the embryos from us or remove the eggs from me and take my husband's sperm and put them together and make the embryos. So that's what that fee is. And then facility fees, which is just basically their overhead of having all the equipment and having a place where this is all done, $2,500. ICSI, which is, it's ICSI, I don't know exactly what it stands for, but it's where they help the sperm and egg come together to make the embryo. They kind of insert it manually rather than letting them just swim around in the dish and find each other, $1,500. Assisted hatching, $700. And then our meds, which was all the meds that I was on to create the embryos, was $11,000. And then there's embryo cryopreservation, which, because my first cycle was fresh, which means they made the embryos and implanted them, but that wasn't a successful round, and then we had to freeze them right away. You can't just let them be out, you have to freeze them, and that is just the cost of them being frozen. So that was $950, and that does include 1 year of storage automatically, but then like I said, every year after that is $360. So that total cost is about $23,150, so about $23,500. And so altogether, if you include just the surrogacy fee that we know we will be paying, and our costs for IVF, it's $100,000, give or take a few hundred or whatever, or 100 or something. And so in total, if we have the worst case scenario, which is like she ends up having a C-section and she ends up losing her uterus, like all these extra things that we, God forbid, do not hope happen, but we have to be prepared for anyway. And she ends up activating her bed rest and all that stuff. It could be about $125,000 altogether. But what we are paying as of now is not quite that much, and we hope it stays that way. And like I said, this is just very specific to us and very specific to our situation. I don't foresee, I hope that I don't foresee any of these little extra things coming into play for her sake, not for the money's sake, you know. I also need to put in there that her insurance policy has like deductibles, and they're like very cheap deductibles. I think it's like $20 per visit or something like that. And we are also responsible for those. And those, I think that would add up to maybe $500 altogether, because that's including anybody that's in network. So that's all of her OBGYN visits and even the specialist visit. It's very cheap. So that's also an additional fee that I need to include. And the other thing that I should say that is if she didn't have insurance on herself, we would either need to put an insurance policy on her and pay the premium, or we would be paying out of pocket for everything. And currently all of her doctors have been in network and her insurance policy has covered it, just like a regular pregnancy. So we are just responsible for the co-pays. Like I said, her employer pays the deductible for that. That's it. If you guys have any other questions or there's anything that I didn't include, please feel free to ask me. Thank you for watching.